Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Yakuza franchise up to this point and my experience with the series. If you are new to my channel, I had originally only played, let me grab them here, the first two games on the PS2 around the time that they originally were released. That's all I had played in the franchise up until the very end of last year, around like Christmas time. And I enjoyed those games, I really liked them. Not that I didn't want to get into the series, it just was very, very long and across many systems, but then over the years, finally, my wife bought me a copy of Yakuza 0, the prequel. She knew I liked the first two games, and I loved the 1980s, so it seemed right up my alley. And by that point, by the time she got me that game, the whole main portion of the franchise, the prequel, and then 1 through 7 and upcoming games, were all available on the same console, the PlayStation 4, one place to play them all, and they were all very cheap. You could get decent editions of a lot of these games for less than 20 bucks a piece. And I was like, alright, I'm going to get into it. I really like those games. I'm going to revisit those, and there's the remakes, and I'm going to plow through this whole franchise. And my goal was to beat it by like midsummer, early fall, and I managed to do that, thankfully in time for like my big new favorite in one of my all-time favorite franchises coming out. So I've been doing a series of videos, which I'll be linking at the end of the video and of course in the description as well, talking about my experience with these games as I'm playing through them. Very fresh, very much like I beat it that day or two before, and just kind of talking about my experience with it more so than a analytical review, just really talking about my experience as I played each one. And it's been fascinating because my experience has changed over the years, and my opinion of certain games has been changed by playing through the subsequent games in the series in a short span of time. It's only been like 7-8 months since I really started, played through the whole thing, and now I'm going to go through, talk about these. I'm going to be doing a ranking for the series of all the ones that I've played, and then talk about a few favorite elements. And the one thing I have to say up front, well, two things. One, this is not a ranking of what I think the best games are. That's something a little different to me. I always, when I do these, it's my favorites, because everyone is going to have different connections to certain themes and stories and gameplay elements, and you could be a really good game, but it just doesn't hit your personal favorite notes, and another game could have a lot of flaws and just connect with you on a certain level because the story that it's tackling has more meaning to you personally, because everyone has these different experiences. So I love doing that. So I'm going to be going through, and the other thing I wanted to mention is that I do not have a single bad experience. It's one of the brilliant things about this entire franchise and playing through over like less than a year, is that even my least favorite games in the series are really good games that I enjoyed and were some of my favorite games I've played in recent memory. Just amazing. Like, there's not a bad game in the franchise in what I've played. I know there's like a couple spin-off games and some are Japan only or whatever, but what I'm going to go through and rank today are the series on the PlayStation 4 and those original two experiences I had on the PlayStation 2 well over a decade ago at this point, like 15 years ago. So that really kind of helps paint my experience with the franchise. So there's going to be 12 games in this ranking, 0 through 7, Lost Judgement, and then the original two PlayStation 2 versions. I feel like they should be separate because they're very different from the remakes, so that's what I'm including in here. And my number 12, again, this really illustrates the one point I made early on, because it's a great game, and I think better than a more popular turn-based RPG on the platform. We have Like a Dragon. I know this is like a fan favorite for a lot of people, and a lot of people that aren't even fans of the series have jumped on with this game in particular, and it's great. And like I said, I like this more than Persona 5. A lot of people out there I know are huge Persona 5 fans, and I really like the Persona series. I enjoyed Persona 5, but if I'm picking a turn-based RPG for the PlayStation 4 and comparing very popular franchises with a lot of very passionate fans, I would pick Like a Dragon over Persona 5. I think it's that good, and it's my least favorite in the series, so that really tells you how much I'm enjoying these games. As a franchise, this is right below the Xeno and the Final Fantasy franchises that have been my favorites my entire life. These are really high. I love this series. I'll replay most of these. Fantastic. But yeah, I talked a little bit more in depth about my reasoning with this game before in the earlier video, but for me, It's, again, a fantastic game. I loved the humor. I loved the change of pace. Turn-based RPGs that's my favorite genre of video game. So this was right up my alley and was great. But I just didn't have quite the same just emotional connection to it that I did with some other games in the franchise. And in the grand scheme of things, of the overall journey, amazing game. Again, I think one of the best turn-based RPGs of the last decade. It's really one of the best. But it ends up being my least favorite in the franchise. I just didn't have quite as much of a connection with that cast, even though I really enjoyed them. And next up, you're going to see this a couple times because I have the remastered collection of 3, 4, and 5. So that was number 12. Number 11 is going to be more specifically Yakuza 3. 3 is this... 3 is just kind of awkward. 3 is a very important game that I think in some ways is underrated, in that it is the essential turning point for the storytelling of the franchise. 1 and 2 are a certain style and tone, and 3, you have the introduction of the orphanage, and Kiryu and the other main characters sort of facing for the first time, which grows as the series moves on, to aging, and to slowly entering a time where the Yakuza as a whole, the concept, is being kind of phased out, and the Tojo clan being constantly on the cusp of being reformed or diminished, and then eventually demise. Like, you really have 3 as essential to a lot of the growth of the storytelling of the characters and the overall world of the entire franchise. 3 is a very important turning point, and narratively I like it, and I like the tone. I love being in Okinawa. I love all the stuff dealing with the kids and everything, and the personal narrative. I love the way that's all set up. But 3 also is the only game in the entire series that felt awkward to play. Everything felt not quite right. It felt there was a move between style of 1 and 2 and the way things worked, and then future games, and again things were changed again later with the Dragon engine, but there's an evolution. And 3, just the way everything works and the mechanics of the gameplay, feels like this awkward in between. And the same thing even not just graphically, but the way some of the artistic presentations, the remastered version, even looking at the original PlayStation 3 version, it's this weird, kind of ugly stepchild. There's it's this weird middle chapter, visually and as far as the evolution of the controls and the engine, in between what 1 and 2 were, and then what games like 4 and beyond would become. Like 3 was just very awkward, but I loved what it did story-wise. That really, and the environment. So that element I loved, but it's the only one that I didn't enjoy the physical act of playing a lot of it. So that makes it lower on the list in number 11. Number 10, it pains me to have this low, but again, all the games are great. It is a classic that'll always be forever in my mind. The original PlayStation 2 version of the first Yakuza game. And this is held back by its terrible English dialogue. It just doesn't work. Again, some of the later games reintroduced the option to have English voice acting, and it's vastly improved over here. I mean, even Mark Hamill, who's a really good voice actor, like his voice acting in this just doesn't feel quite right. It was weirdly miscast, and it totally doesn't work. And again, as I said, even though there is the option for English voice casting, it feels weird in these games because they are so Japanese, and they take place in Japan, and a lot of the characters are based off real Japanese people who are voicing those characters. It feels weird to give them a dub in different language. I don't know, it's a weird thing, but but what I'm getting at is that I would consider the later English dubs an odd choice, but well done. This was both odd and not very well done. And again, I really love it, and it's a great introduction to the series, and all the elements that would later become classic start here. But just as a whole package, they got better with time, which is a great thing to see a series improve. Like, that's the only reason that it's so low, is that this does a lot of great things and is a fun game, but they improved. They got better over time, so that makes it pretty low. Number 9, beating that out, really showing the evolution of the series, we have Yakuza Kiwami, the remake of the first game. the lesser of the two remakes, for sure, but still a vast improvement, and it really adds a lot of. You can see in replaying the original PlayStation 2 version and be moving on to this, you can see how much the series has progressed over time. And some of the additions in here, like definitely the Majima everywhere, like everything, the growth of Goro over the franchise is fantastic and great sense of humor. So this is a fantastic improvement over the original version. The original version, I still love it, but man, this shows how much the series has grown. Number 8, got to bring this up again. We have in the middle here, Yakuza 4, and I really enjoyed, like, this is the step after 3 into the next generation of Yakuza games. All the kind of awkwardness was ironed out, things were improved. I loved some of the new characters, like especially Sejima. Like, there's so many new things that were added in 4 that were just amazing, that we now think of as part of the classic chronology of Yakuza. And I liked having, for the first time, really, the story from different characters' perspectives. Akiyama is one of my favorites in the entire franchise from this point on. Just getting those different perspectives, the different gameplay styles, expanding the way you can explore Kamurocho a lot more in 4. And just overall, I loved everything that was added in 4. It took a lot of the ridiculous, absurd to like silly levels melodrama and action and everything to the extreme. One of my favorite things in the franchise is the big, end. They always, you end on the top of the Millennium Tower or near the top of the Millennium Tower in most of the games. But I love with the millions of dollars flowing everywhere, and the helicopter, and everyone just kind of pairing off and going to their corners, and then this just absurd, over the top macho madness and melodrama. Like, I love that kind of stuff. It's corny and cheesy and fun and exciting, and I love the way the series was moving forward. It's just fantastic, but I do really enjoy when those are blended in a lot of later games, which are higher. The storytelling and tone of 3 and 4 are very different, and I kind of like something more in between. Number 7, this one hurts me the most in some ways. Yakuza 5, number 7, the last in this remastered collection. Because I talked about in my initial experience with the game, the first 2/3 or more of the game is my favorite experience in the entire franchise. Like, if you take, my first playthrough was, I don't remember, 50 hours or whatever. And if you took the first 30 something hours, it's my favorite game in the series. But it's all the way down at number 7. Why? Because there is a section later on that I genuinely disliked playing, and narratively it fell apart for me for a while. It picked up the very ending. The climax of 5 is fantastic, and I think it's a great send-off to a lot of the classic characters in the era, as we are wrapping things up for the story, in the lifetime of Kiryu. But again, there's just, it's very uneven. 5 is sort of, they're building and building. Each game is from the original PlayStation 2 version of 1. Every game is getting bigger and bigger. There's more to do. What's available to explore within Kamurocho is the city itself is expanding, and then you add, now you can go to the rooftops, and you can go into the sewers. There are new buildings you can go into. It's getting bigger and bigger. Kamurocho Hills, things are expanding, and now we're adding, even starting with number 2, we're adding more cities, and those cities are getting more detailed and just getting bigger and bigger. And 5 is the culmination of that, and I don't think they will ever attempt to tackle what they did in 5. There are so many environments in here, so many full-scale cities, not even including the prison setting and the village in the mountains. There's so many full-scale cities that, this puts most games to shame as far as the amount of content that's in here is extraordinary. Just even some big open world RPGs, they don't have half the amount of just the cities that you can go through. They built over the years, and so many new ones in here. 5 it's incredible. And then not only that, the gameplay variety is crazy. All the taxi elements, the hunting games, even something I thought I wasn't going to be super into, but I was totally into, the pop idol journey and dancing minigame stuff with Haruko. There's so much in 5 that's incredible. is an uneven experience, because then towards the end it really fell apart for me, and this was the hardest one for me to place because, in again, the first portions of this game I like better than a lot of games I have placed above this as far as my favorites, but a lot of those other ones, even though they never quite hit that peak for me, they were a much more even experience the entire way through, and I had an overall better experience because of that. So that's kind of what made 5 really fall for me. I'll replay it someday. I really enjoyed it. There were portions of 5 that, again, like, Kiryu, Taxi Man is one of my favorite things ever. That opening city is one of my favorite cities in the franchise. I really love the hunting stuff and the prison drama. I just liked everything that was involved, and again, I loved being the pop princess with Haruko, which I did not expect, but they did a great job with that. It was really fun and addictive. So 5 is just such a weird mixed bag that kept moving up and down my list, and kind of settled at that near the middle point, just because these last games here, the ones that made the top portion of the list, were a more consistent, solid experience from beginning to end. Number 6, a more recent experience, the first Judgment game. And I mentioned before how much I love what's happening with the series, the pairing of these two, as you're wrapping things, the original narrative's wrapping up with 6, and you're moving on to a new generation, expanding the storytelling. I wanted to see a different direction, a different take on a familiar world and familiar cities and familiar characters. And you got that with both these games, and I love how you're seeing a different approach to the world that you love, but very different styles. Like, you're going off in opposite directions, and that's why I really want to see both of these continue, because I like that dynamic of getting very different feels, like very different approaches to keeping everything fresh and new in the evolution of this franchise as things go on. But for me, again, it's a personal taste thing. This was much more up my alley than Like a Dragon. Again, that was a great game, a great experience, but this is more my style. This is more my tone. This is what I really liked, and I talked all about in my discussion of the game as I played it originally. I loved the detective elements. I liked the style of storytelling. I was so drawn into the drama of here and the new characters and the new gameplay elements that were really fresh and original. And again, they could have been improved, which they were, but there was so much in here that this ended up being, just from the start, one of my favorite experiences in the whole franchise, and was a solid game from beginning to end. Number 5, and I kind of have to talk about 5 and 4, I have to bring them up together because I really need to talk about them at the same time, and my reasoning why one is above the other. My number 5 is Yakuza Kiwami 2, the remake of the second game in the franchise. Beautiful. This and 6 are still, I think, visually the most astounding games in the franchise. They just look great. Just incredible what they've done. And I have to bring up then my number 4, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, I think. This is one of 2 big surprises, I think. First one is that number 4 is the original PlayStation 2 version of Yakuza 2. Yeah, the remake of 1 is a huge improvement over the original version. I actually like the original version of 2 more, though. Again, that's going to surprise a lot of people, and there are obviously a lot of huge improvements moving from the PlayStation 2, second game in the franchise, versus one of the more recent games in the franchise, all the way in the PlayStation 4, using the new engine. Just visually, it's like, holy cow, this looks amazing. So you have, obviously, those are huge improvements just based on the passage of time and more powerful technology. And there's a lot of extra in here as well. There's a lot of new content, which is fantastic and a lot of fun. But this shows something that's not a negative in the evolution of the series, but just something that's different. The tone of the series has changed over the years. You can see it a little bit in the remake of 1 compared to the original, but really in this, the tone of storytelling became more silly over the years. There's always silliness, there's always a sense of humor, but the original version of Yakuza 2, just in the comparison of what content is there, the structure of the storytelling, and the music, which I'll talk about as well, because it's a big factor here, the general tone of 2 is somewhere in between this and something like Judgment or Lost Judgment. It's a little more serious, a little more dour, a little more dramatic in a different way. Becomes a little, things over the years become a little more soap opera dramatic, big macho soap opera. My wife calls it, she's like, it's like married. My wife, how'd she describe it once? As like violent married with, not what the heck is the violent all my children for like dudes. Like it's just hyper like masculine and like it's in a great way. And even when they go over the top, it's in a way that I like because it becomes funny. And like fascinating and just ridiculous, but the storytelling was a little more grounded. Just minor differences here and there in the very beginning of the franchise, 1, 2, and 3, versus how it grew over time. Again, that's not a negative. Just I actually like that it changed stylistically a little bit over time because it kept things a little more interesting and fresh over the span of the games. But yeah, I just for some reason the specific story of 2, I like the slightly older tone more in the way it's told with the Korean mafia and everything that's going on here, a little more in the original. And there's a lot of great extra content in this one, but it's more in the form of mini games and some more more sexualized mini games, which weren't as present in the older ones. Really great stuff, a lot of fun. This is one of my favorites in the franchise. I love this, but there were a few things tonally, again, I liked better in the original, and a couple of those, as I said before, were some music changes. There's 2 things in particular. One, the song that plays during the credits after the big ending scene, which this might be my favorite. It's close. This is one of my favorite endings for a Yakuza game in the franchise, and is the one physically true opponent for Kiryu over the course of the series. There's lots of more important final bosses and things narratively over the years, and more personal things like fights with Goro, but as far as a one-on-one Kiryu at his most powerful, at his peak, facing someone who is physically close to his equal, this is like the closest that ever came. I love the ending, but the original song for the ending credits fits that ending tonally, and it's just perfect. And what's put here is like a weird tonal shift, and it's like very jarring. And there's one other musical element that is very jarring, which is during a very important, very dramatic scene where a main character is stabbed. And the original music track is much better, and there are a few things like that. And it's weird. There's a lot of extra content here, but there's actually a couple things missing that were from the original. Just a few like kind of minor differences in the experience, and one little tiny, like it's like a tiny street portion of a city is taken out. You wouldn't even notice really unless you replayed this recently, but I kind of missed it a little bit. And there's a scene that took place there that was just moved to a different location, and there's just little things that, again, tonally I just like the original more, even though gameplay wise I like the remake more, and obviously it looks more modern, whatever. But I don't know, this also to me, because I'd played only the first 2, was the peak of the franchise for me, because it's a big improvement from 1 to 2, especially playing the original version. Massive improvement in every way. And this just in my mind for like, what even year did this come out? But it was over a decade of Yakuza 2. This was the peak of the franchise for me, and even playing through a lot of the newer games to this point, a lot of them weren't quite matching up to just what I loved about this experience. So I always thought this was going to be my number 1 when I finished up, but over the course of the playthrough, that did not end up being true. My number 3, I'm going to be very brief with this one because literally 20 minutes ago I recorded my video talking about this. It's the last one that was just up, so a lot of you probably just heard me talk about it. But my number 3, and I am shocked it is this high. Before I'd played it, as I was playing through, I really thought the spin-off, the newer games, like a Dragon, Judgment, Lost Judgement, were not going to be anywhere near the older games in the franchise. Boy, was I wrong, because my 3rd favorite overall in the series, and it's like knocking on the door of 1 and 2, is Lost Judgement. I love this game. Everything that I wanted to see slightly improved or changed from the first game was, and I just had such an emotional connection to the characters and the themes of bullying and the legal system and the revenge and different perspectives on what justice really means and different ways of looking at the world. And I fell in love with this. Just fantastic. This is a brilliant game. Just great. But anyway, I'll move on because I just talked about that. And moving on to my top two. And aside from the placement of 5, which moved all the time, these two just, as I was playing through, flip-flopped in my mind, and I couldn't decide for the longest time until after I got through 7, like a dragon, and after I got through Judgment, and then finally playing through Lost Judgment, I had enough time to really think about these two experiences and decide between the two. And this is going to be one of the other surprises because it's not everyone's favorite, and I get why, but to me what they did worked. And then there's one game that I couldn't get off my mind. Every time I played through again, starting from in December, playing through all these games, there's one that stuck with me that I just couldn't shake. And I didn't want it to be my favorite, weirdly, but it is. So starting with number 2, we have 6, The Song of Life. And this is, a lot of people, I get why some people this is not their favorite, because it comes right off the heels of 5, which again, the series kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and 5, the amount of content in there is mind-blowing. The mini-games, again, so many, just multiple cities, multiple new cities and familiar cities. It's huge, it's endless. And then 6, they take the total opposite approach, where you can't even explore the entirety of Kamurocho. A lot of it is not available, and then the new city that they only add one new one. You can't get the other ones, and it's fairly on the smaller side compared to other ones. And gameplay-wise, even your combat is a little more simplified compared to some previous games, which not everyone liked. There's still a lot of good mini games and things in here, but it's a much more focused experience. It's really geared towards, you're going to focus on the main story. That's what you're going to do in this game. It's not like 5 where you could spend 150 hours doing oddball stuff, doing whatever you want. This is how we want to tell the story. This is how we want to wrap up our flagship, main character for the franchise, and you're going to focus on the story. That's what you're going to do. I actually liked that. I really like the laser focus this has. Again, I think, for me, again, it's just a personal taste thing as far as the tone of the story, and everyone's going to connect differently, different themes, but the theme of fatherhood and the theme of family and the different definitions of that, like the bullying elements in Lost Judgment, those two had the greatest personal connection to me. I felt emotionally really attached to those narratives, and the new city they created that's my favorite place, even more than Kamurocho in the whole franchise. Again, it's a personal taste thing. Everyone's going to think differently, but I love the feeling of history and richness and the kind of sleepy seaside village feel, and it has a very Shenmue vibe, which I love Shenmue, so that really added to it. 6 is just, for me, was the perfect kind of capstone to that original franchise, and really it recaptured a lot of those elements that I liked narratively in 3 and put them in a greater style, and obviously, and this is just, I think, even more than some ones that came out afterwards. I think this is the visually the prettiest game in the franchise. It's beautiful and just very impressive. I really enjoyed 6 a lot. To me, I understand why some people it was a letdown because of the lesser amount of content, but for me, I actually thought that was necessary for the improvement of the storytelling that it wanted to get across. And again, that storytelling I loved. This, when I finished it, I'm like, this is my favorite. And it's really close with number 1. It's almost a tie, but there's one experience, and Amanda's gonna be laughing because she told me this is gonna be your favorite. And I'm like, no, it's not. And I can't shake it. This was my restart for the franchise. I'd only played 1 and 2, and then I started over finally and went through the whole thing. I started with 0. I didn't want it to be my favorite because I'm like, it's just my first one back, getting me back into the series. I couldn't shake it. 0 to me is the perfect combination of everything in the series. There are some games here that I think have they have more content. There are some games that might have a better overall narrative structure. I like the story a little bit better in Lost Judgement. There's some things that are better in some games here or there, but I don't think any game combines the best of every game that came before and after this and to create the perfect overall, this is what the Yakuza experience is. Like Zero, as far as the storytelling, the type of side games, the sense of humor, the sense of drama, everything that all these games kind of have a little bit of a different sway. They're a little more towards the drama, a little bit in the family element. Other ones are more towards the mini games. Other ones are more towards the political stuff. Other ones more towards the personal drama. There's these different vibes to all of them that make each game unique and interesting, but Zero is the perfect combination of everything. And I couldn't shake the experience, and I loved the dual storytelling, switching back and forth between Kiryu and Goro, and it fleshed out so many amazing things, and I cannot shake the experience of Zero. It's my favorite game in the franchise. It really is. I again, it's a weird thing where like I didn't want it to be, but it is. It's fantastic. So that's my number one in the series. And just a few little quick things to add here on the end. I really want to hear your experiences with this series, because I know everyone's got a very different list, very different take than where I ranked mine. And just a few that I wanted to point out. Depending on what kind of Yakuza fan you are, the number one in a different category, just looking at the amount, not just the amount, but the quantity and quality added together of side content, nothing will come close to Yakuza 5 in this collection. There's so much in there, and there's a variety of like you're doing dancing mini games, you're setting traps and hunting bears in the mountains, you're playing a prison drama, you're going to this city, that city, all these brand new cities, you're playing Crazy Taxi, street racing. There's so much in 5. Just from that element, that's the best game in the series, and they almost did too much. That was his problem in a way. And then story-wise, I think that's the other element that is super important. My three favorite are my three favorites, but overall, even though it's my third favorite for the entire series, I think narratively, I think the writing is the strongest in Lost Judgment. I think that is the best overall, and I think these two are very different, so for me they're kind of tied, but those are my three as far as storytelling, just gameplay wise, and all the extra stuff. 5 is the best in the series. Strictly the story, nothing else considered, Lost Judgment might be the best in the series. And that's kind of my discussion, my long discussion of the entire franchise. I knew this was going to be long. I had a lot to say. It's a big series, and it's been a brilliant experience, and I'm really looking forward to what comes next.